All right, everyone. Thank you for coming and welcome to the 16th HCBiz show. Very excited. We've got a great guest here today to talk about social media for doctors and how you might be able to find value and get moving on it. And our premise here at the HCBiz show is always about being very practical in our advice and about the approach of things. And that's the question. The questioning will certainly follow that. And hopefully we'll give you some pointers on should I get started in social media if I'm a doctor? And if so, how do I go about doing that? How do I keep it from becoming a distraction while still providing some value to me, my practice, my patients, my community, etc. So with that, just want to say hello to my co-host, Shahid Shah. Thank you for being here as always. You bring a lot to the conversation, and I want to welcome Mandi Bishop. You all know her, healthcare firebrand, and really just social media elite, I'll say, and damn good karaoke singer. If you haven't had the pleasure, you have to check her out at some conference sometime. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited
to give yourself a better intro than that, if you'd like.
No, that was pretty fantastic and fabulous. For my day job, I run the global healthcare analytics consulting division of Dell. And but I am definitely far better known as @MandiBPro on Twitter. So I'm really excited to have the conversation about how to help healthcare understand and realize the true value of social media engagement.
Awesome.
It matters. Yeah.
Great to have you here. Shahid, do you have any opening comments, or you want to give a little intro, or should we get rolling?
Yeah, I mean, just from an introductory perspective, let's just talk about the topic. There are, we're now at a point in 2016, middle of 2016, where the idea of new media, social media, et cetera, isn't that interesting broadly, but very specifically, where should we apply it? Where should we not apply it? This is what we'll talk about today. And Mandi's uniquely qualified to talk about that because she's doing so on behalf of Dell, which is a huge company, but Dell gives her a lot of leeway. So anybody who believes that what she's doing is easy and she can just do it because she's Mandi. One of the reasons we wanted her to join us here is to talk about a little why, from a corporate perspective, You're not just allowed to say anything you want at any time, but you've struck a really nice balance between what you're allowed to do personally, what you're allowed to do professionally, how to tie the two together. And that's really what we want to talk about from the healthcare provider's point of view. There are many things that they can say, many things that they cannot say. And so striking that balance, it seems to me, is one of the most difficult things to think about. So maybe, Mandi, just say a couple of words give a little bit more detail around what you do for Dell and how you use social media in that area. And then we'll translate some of that to the discussion that we'll have around the physicians.
Absolutely. So first, I just wanted to say whenever anybody asks me if they should participate in social media, I usually give them the 30-second story on how Twitter changed my life, right? And I know that it sounds hokey, and I don't mean that, and I'm not meaning it as a joke. I don't mean I'm actually very, very serious. Twitter literally changed my life. So all of the opportunities that I have had, that I've had a chance to pursue and realize in the last several years have been because of my engagement in social media. So many years ago, I decided I wanted to strike out on my own. I had been an independent consultant for a long time, and I wanted to understand what was happening nationally in my industry. And I think that is something I think many of us can universally acknowledge that that's a desire. We want to understand what's happening away from our own locale, away from our own company, away from our own experience. And we want to be able to reach out and see what our peers, what someone like me is doing in Kansas, what someone like me is doing in Germany, what someone like me is doing in South America. And social media gives us the opportunity to do that. So I created a Twitter handle, and at first I began lurking, and then I bumbled my way into doing all kinds of crazy things and bumped into several kind of social media luminaries in the healthcare space. So I was blessed enough to bump into Brian A. here and to John Lynn, who I see has joined us on the tweet chat. Hey, John. And others who helped me understand first how to appropriately engage in social media. Wen Dombrowski, who is one of the physicians who's incredibly active on Twitter and active in healthcare social media, helped me understand what a tweet chat is, the structure of a tweet chat, and has given me lots of tips and tricks to follow for social engagement. And that engagement and that organic growth of both my network of the people that I engage with on a regular basis, as well as my following and the opportunity for me to have a voice, to establish a voice, and then to amplify that voice across my network, grew over the years to the point where, I was very aggressively pursued by Dell. So, when you're interested in getting started and you're trying to identify whether or not to get started, my advice to you is please stake a claim, create a profile. You don't have to flesh it out, but have stake, put a stake in the ground and establish a presence. And even if you do nothing but listen, get started. That's a way to get started. So now I am very visible for Dell as well as I ensure that I maintain my own kind of personal brand. It is a balance, like you said, Shahid. It's very different to engage on behalf of a corporate entity. And I'm always very cognizant of the fact that when I am engaging specifically on behalf of Dell, I am always very conscious of who I'm specifically recognizing, the names that I might drop, the types of events and activities that I will reference in those, in those contexts. But because I am part of a corporate entity, even though I do maintain my own personal brand and personal identity, I have to maintain that same level of consciousness in the things that I communicate publicly. So I would say that, to anyone who is started and who is looking to engage and looking to kind of strike that balance, I have one rule in all relationships in my life, and it's proving to be very helpful here on social media and with social media engagement as well. And that rule is, if if the person that you're talking about or the person that you're doing something, that you're doing something in conjunction with, found out about this thing that you were doing, if they would consider it wrong, or if they were considered in some way shameful, or if you would be embarrassed that they found out about it, then it's the wrong thing to do and don't do it. So that's like the one simple rule I apply to all relationships in my life. And I've been able to apply that same kind of law to my social media engagement. I've gotten my hand slapped. So there are definitely cautionary tales about things that I have done inadvertently, incorrectly, right? So there are stories that happen in social media. There are things that occur, stories that get picked up that we amplify because they're interesting. They're human interest stories. They're interesting stories. A lot of the ransomware attacks in recent memory have been some of these where I have felt the need to chime in, and that probably was not smart. So, that just be careful. If the more general, if you're going to participate and you're not really sure what the rules should be for you, don't ever name drop, ever. Always best to stay general.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And that came up on the tweet chat today. And I think if that's, that's a rule of thumb in healthcare, but it's really a rule of thumb in any business, because obviously you're not a provider, but don't mention patients, don't mention specific details about very specific things. It's just not the place for it. Certainly I wouldn't. I know, Shahid, you don't go out there and talk specifically about your clients and what's going on behind closed doors at their business.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so, Mandi, you mentioned quite a few things that we could take as lessons. So if you're an independent physician working for an independent practice, what you need to do is you're probably looking to get onto social media to help market your capabilities, market your practice, potentially grow the number of patients that you have. And one of the things about social media really is if you have a purpose, if you know why you're doing it, and your position and your capabilities within your organization, things are actually not that hard. It sounds confusing, et cetera. But if you're an independent practice and you're going after patients and you're trying to recruit patients, what you do associated with that is very different than if you are an affiliated physician. You may also be independent, but you're affiliated with a larger entity. Say you're affiliated with your local hospital or a local health system. Now you start to get into a little bit more, not of a vice grip or anything like that, but you get a little bit more contained. Now, if you're not just affiliated, but you are employed by another hospital or a health system or a vendor, and you're speaking on behalf of them, you're now falling into a very similar circumstance as Mandi is. And then lastly, you may lead these organizations. So you're a physician leader, not just employed or affiliated, but leading major organizations. And so what we could do in this conversation is break those up into those four paths and say, if you are trying to grow your practice, if you're independent and you're trying to gain more patients, what should you do? And then we'll walk through the rest of the spectrum. So maybe Don and Mandi, if you want to just start there, Mandi, what are some suggestions if you're an independent practice leading physician? What would you do what are some of the reasons why you would want to do it? I spoke about recruiting patients, but of course, thought leadership, establishing your credibility, establishing your brand. Tell us about why you would do it, and then what are some good techniques to get.
Well, at first, I think the breakout is I think that's an excellent way to break out our thought process around the different behaviors that you might exhibit in each of those phases. I would add a fourth one, and that is it's applicable to all three. Always be cognizant that, I don't believe that we live in a world anymore where we will be in the same position and with the same organization for the rest of your life, right? That is not the truth for the vast majority of us. So always be cognizant of the fact that the internet is indeed forever. So be sure that when you do engage, whether you're engaging as an independent physician and you have a little bit more leeway in the manner in which you engage, that you're always conscious of the fact that at some point you might become part of a larger, become affiliated with a larger entity, or you might decide that you want to take the physician executive route. And just know that that is something that will be potentially searched, potentially searchable, potentially located by future employers. So just like I caution my daughter on social media, right? The fact that college recruiters are now taking a look at all of the kids' social media profiles before they staff their athletic teams, for example. Just always be conscious of the fact that what you do online reflects on you, regardless of, in what position you're in. But for independent practitioners, they're heroes, right? I think that independent general practitioners, they are the heroes of medicine to me. And I'm just always in awe of the amount of work that they do on a daily basis to keep us running. They are the backbone of the healthcare system. And I just, anyone who's watching who happens to be a family medicine or an independent practitioner, I applaud you. And I'm so grateful that you're here and that you're continuing to do the work that you do. And I know that it can be very challenging to find enough hours in the day to do your own job and to do the charting that now comes with your job, and to try to stay alive in this new world of kind of death by regulation. But social media can do not just a lot of engagement with your patients and for your practice and to do marketing and to provide thought leadership, but it can also be an outlet for you to reach outside yourself and to get a lot of feedback and support from your peers. I was very blessed last week to be on a panel with Dr. Kathy Schneider, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Delaware Valley ACO organization. And she was telling me about a Facebook group for female professional physicians. So, and it's become a support network for her. And it's become a way she engages via social media platform with her peers and with women who are like her, who have family issues, they've got practice issues, and they're leveraging the social media outlet to get feedback, not just on their balance and striking a balance in their lives, but on their patients. They're trying to get information for clinical diagnoses for rare conditions that they may not come across. So that's something that independent practitioners, that's a really valuable resource. Social media has a number of new and emerging networks that can help you research beyond your experience, right? They can help you get access to specialists elsewhere, to get information that you would not otherwise necessarily be able to find quickly. Even if you don't have access to all the journals, for example, but you've got access to Twitter and you've got access to Instagram and you've got access to Facebook, it provides this wealth of information that's not necessarily readily available elsewhere. And why you would do it, Don in his blog post prior to this event, cited the most recent Pew data that indicates, I think that data said 70%, the most recent stats that I saw said 80% of the adults, the entire adult population in the United States, everyone over the age of 18 is on Facebook. So if 80% of the population is on Facebook, and then I believe that the Pew study said that 70% of those are on Facebook daily, not only are your patients and their caregivers on Facebook, but the entire community where you live, right? So the opportunity to grow your practice, this is where they are. So establishing a presence is critical. It's critical to your ongoing growth and success. It's critical to, to being an effective leader for healthcare within your community. So that's independent.
Yeah, no, that's right. So if you think about the independent again, if you, 25, 30 years ago, if you didn't have a phone number, you were crazy. Then if you didn't have a fax number, you would have been crazy. If you didn't have an office where people could come, you would have been crazy. So these are extensions, right? So having a Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, are extensions about your presence. And just like today, you can say, well, I answer questions from my patients all the time when they call me up, but I don't make outbound phone calls to my patients. You can actually get onto social media to do comments. You can respond to questions. You can respond to things. And that doesn't take as much time. You can at least, maybe 15 minutes a day, you can say, I just follow the people that I want to follow, and I'm going to respond to them, but not really initiate conversations. And that's a great way to get started because, as you said, these heroes, they just don't have time. And in fact, if they're going to be saving lives versus sitting on social media, let's have them save lives. So let's not try to convince them to do otherwise. Exactly. But at the same time, doing so in a way where you take your existing analogs and say, how would I do that today? If someone were calling me, would I not pick up the phone? Well, of course not, right? You have office hours, et cetera. When somebody calls you, you pick them up. Somebody sends you a letter, you answer the letter. Somebody sends you a fax, you answer the fax. Do that first as far as social media is concerned, and that'll get you going, as an independent physician working in an independent practice. The same way, if you're now starting to say that I want to recruit patients, the best thing to do is to figure out, well, what kind of patients do you want? If you want a lot of Medicare patients, make sure that you're talking about topics that help you acquire 55 and older population citizens. Exactly. If you want to attract single young moms, then make sure you're writing about, influencing, posting blogs, writing comments about what single moms would want to focus on. If you want to go on to CCM, you want to do primary care. So a lot of times we don't really sit down and say, well, what am I trying to do and what am I trying to attract? And then base my strategy on that. And that's why, as part of HCBiz, rather than just, general social media, what we want to say is if you're trying to initiate your business of healthcare, this is one great way. So, all the advice that Mandi just gave for independent physicians makes a ton of sense. And if you look at the next group, like let's say you're an independent physician, but affiliated also with a number of different organizations, what kinds of things would you suggest, Mandi, that they get into? So would recruiting patients also be something that they're trying to do on behalf of the organization? That might be a question that would come up. Or really, is the affiliated organization coming to them? Much like, when Dell was reaching out to you, they wanted that thought leadership. They wanted to have someone affiliated with them that the rest of the community knew. So is that about the way to think about it?
It is. And it's interesting because there's a lot of things that you just mentioned about independent general practitioners that are also
we lost your audio.
You lost my audio? Can you still hear me? Shahid, can you hear me?
I can still hear you, Mandi.
Is it just Shahid who can't hear me?
Yeah, he might be having an issue.
So I'll keep talking, and Shahid, you just let me know. Give me the okay when you can hear me again. Okay. Awesome.
All right, everyone on the side says I can hear you, so we're good.
So there are a couple things that he hit on that I want to make sure that I highlight because it's important for every single one of the groups that were identified. So for independent general practitioners, for affiliated physicians, and then for physician executives. As far as the ROI of social media and why you would want to participate, there's something really important here. You can create content once that is applicable to any number of situations, right? So if you are able to answer a question for a patient, if you're able to answer a question about a particular disease state, or if you think about the video of the pediatrician that went viral where he was shaking the baby's butt. Does everybody remember the pediatrician who was holding a baby? There was a video of a pediatrician holding a baby, and his name escapes me now, but he was shaking the baby's butt, and he was just saying how to calm a screaming baby. And this video was on YouTube, and it got, it went viral. It had a couple million views within the span of about 30 days. Yes. And so it was really, that's a wonderful example of something that he's solving a real problem. It's a question I'm sure he got probably 20 times a day as a pediatrician. But in creating this resource, not only is he instantly kind of, famous, but he's created a real tactical resource for the community and has kind of catapulted himself to thought leadership amongst pediatricians. So he was, to the best of my knowledge, he was an independent practitioner, but that same level of thought leadership and that type of kind of standout nature is something that would be attractive as an affiliated physician as well as a physician executive. So I think anyone, if you're in that type of a position, if you have questions that come to you 20 times a day, you have a patient who asks you that, you hear the same question from 10 different patients 10 times per day. If you answer that question in social media, if you create a blog or if you create a Facebook post addressing a common issue or common question for your patient population, or for the target population of patients that you're looking for, then you've invested the time to do it once and to do it right. And that time investment can pay off dividends in the long run because it becomes a searchable resource for people in your community, your own patients, as well as patients that you might potentially attract.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And one thing I want to add too is that sometimes you'll get it wrong when you put stuff out there too, and that's actually okay too, because that's one of the things I hear from people a lot is I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to put these things to paper because of what you just said. They're all there forever. And what I've found is that there's very little bad that comes of it if you genuinely put out a thought and you're trying to do something productive with it and you're wrong. It's people come and they help you and they tell you that, and that's better than keeping that wrong thought in your head. So best place for it is way out in the open. Yeah. Let people help you get better.
And here's something interesting that Don Lynn over has said in the chat. He says the post social media is that most practices don't need to do social media to be successful. Pretty much all practices could benefit from social media, but most practices don't need social media to be successful. I don't know if I agree with that on a going forward basis. I think that may have been true for the preceding 2 decades. But I think that as the millennials are aging into the workforce and then aging into more chronic condition care management, I think that social media is going to become critical. There are generations of the big 4 consulting firms, Accenture, E&Y, PricewaterhouseCoopers. They are adjusting their entire hiring and workplace culture in order to account for millennials and in order to account for digital natives. So healthcare is also going to have to make room and accommodate the needs of digital natives as they age into these chronic care management systems. So while that may have been true, I think in the past, social media is, and right now we're on the cusp of seeing social as, the tipping point from a nice to have, this is a differentiator experience, to this is crucially important for the survival and continued growth of my practice, of my large organization, of my, and even my parity and my seat at the table with CMS, right? So we want to make sure that they have that seat at the table and that they don't get on the menu. That was a really great quote from the physician executive that you'd quoted in the blog, Don. Like if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Yeah. There was that came from that 21 things you could do, doctors could do on social media, and there was a lot of really good examples out there, and some that weren't so obvious. And to your point about structuring for the millennials and everything is using it as a recruiting tool, because there's if you're a healthcare organization, you want to hire the best healthcare workers and the best providers, and showing through social media that you have the type of culture that's going to appeal to them, and you utilize the types of tools that are going to appeal to them. That's actually going to help you on the recruiting front. And the CMS thing's an awesome example. I don't know if he's here, but Dr. Mike Kruchek, that's on with us a bunch, he wrote an open letter to Andy Slavitt as a blog post and tweeted it to him. And a couple weeks later, he was sitting in Baltimore with the team at CMS, getting interviewed as a physician about what he thinks they should do with the MIPS program and that. So it's a beautiful example of exactly what you just said. It's like it gives you a voice, and it's something that just didn't used to exist. Yeah. So take advantage.
It does, and I've got a couple specific examples of the ways in which and I'm not a physician. These kinds of interactions. If I were a physician, but I'm in discussions right now with the ONC to help to create a roundtable on prior authorization and doing a complete refactoring of the prior authorization process. And it started from social media because there's been an outcry on social media for prior authorization. So it really is like it gives you that seat at the table in these regulatory discussions and gives you access to individuals at that level that you otherwise wouldn't have had. So Shahid, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. I had to reboot everything, but now it's back. Thank you.
Nice. Well, it's funny. So we were talking about something that I think would be really interesting to you from an affiliated physician perspective, as well as a physician executive perspective. We were talking about the social media imperative for recruiting the next generation of doctors, right? We're losing doctors on a daily basis to health IT. We're losing doctors to startups. So it is challenging. It's becoming increasingly more challenging for us to attract doctors to actually practicing medicine. And social media offers an opportunity to engage with digital natives, right? The people who are aging into these types of positions. It would create a much more digital native engagement experience for those folks to be recruited via social, to be able to lure them away from the Silicon Valley health IT startups and to actually have them practice medicine as these larger affiliates and physician executives. Like, adopting social media as a recruitment strategy is another key, business reason why getting social is going to be an imperative.
No, I love it. That's
I've got
great.
Ryan.
I think it's a great point to bring up. And in fact, when you look at the next generation of business models, whether we're looking at alternative payment models, value-based reimbursement, et cetera, that's removing this idea that everything that I do has to be tied to some fees for a service that I do. And that actually opens up and expands these capabilities. So when you look at large health systems and independent physician practices and affiliated physicians, I think all of them, they all wonder, and I think John just wrote, John Lynn, a few minutes ago, that most physicians don't necessarily need to be on social media in order to do their jobs. That's probably a good point to make. And what we can see is that if you think about the next generation of jobs, which is population health, care coordination, care management across institutions, care management across stakeholders. Now that starts to say that in the old fee-for-service model, where somebody had to come in and all I needed to do social media was for marketing and not really for care management, education, people get their education online in a variety of different ways. But when you look at the next generation models, and of course, Mandi, you write about this a lot. Don's written about it a few times over the last few months. Welcome, David. If you look at what we're doing in the next few years, the comprehensive primary care program that we just talked about 4 or 5 episodes ago, and in these areas, as we start to consider, is care really going to change with these new alternative payment models and in a value-based world? If the answer is yes, then I think social media will lead it, or could lead it. I'm not saying will lead it, but could lead it. If the answer is no, and really the whole idea about value-based reimbursement is not reality, then we go back to normal scenarios where you can use it for recruitment of patients. But I love the idea that you guys just talked about, but recruiting the next generation physicians themselves. I'm not sure how much that helps with the physician brain drain that's going out in the next year or two. But I can certainly see any organizations that have a strategy around this to use social media to help recruit, and before going to the recruitment effort, they help reorganize their environment so that the burnout that's occurring with physicians today, the burnout is not occurring because of simply regulations. But if you look at regulations, the number of hours, the amount of change going out, the fact that so much less time is spent in care and so much more time is spent in administration, that all leads to burnout. And if we're looking at reorganizing our institutions to reduce burnout, and social media can help in that space, I think that would be terrific. So with that, we want to welcome David.
Hi, Shahid.
Any quick words?
Yeah, I just wanted to interject here that I think we're sort of eliding the difference between social media and digital health tools. And I think they're related, but different and important to maintain the difference there. Social media is generally thought of as something that's open, not private, where there are certainly many digital tools that can be used that can be used in a private, secure setting for communication between provider and patient. I think the the growth in the use of these tools is something that's very important as we are continuing to experience the silver tsunami as we're all getting older. There simply won't be enough physicians to take care of us as we get older and the next generation is smaller. So we need these tools in order to leverage the smaller number of providers coming up in the next generation. So there's both the necessity to use these tools both privately and not privately. And again, to repeat my point, is that this leverages the number of physicians or the waning number of physicians relative to the number of patients out there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and it's a constraint that's going to force us down a path, and yeah, I think that there is. It's a good point to make sure that we're not trying to blend these tools together, because there's patient portals and there's patient engagement tools and everything else, and that's definitely separate from what we're talking about here. And the advice is generally don't do that on social media. Don't talk to your patients. Don't answer those types of questions. So.
In some
but I
circumstances,
think that
just
that's,
as we keep hearing in the sort of world of HIPAA, where I have one foot firmly planted, the data, the information is the patient's to decide whether and how it is to be shared. So if a patient decides it's easier for me to communicate with my doc via Facebook, then great. That's up to the patient to decide. And the patient needs to get what we call a light warning saying, hey, you know that Facebook is public, right? Are you okay with that? After that, that's fine. And for some patients, for some populations, for some demographics, different social media channels are going to be much more useful than sending an alert to an email that requires a login to a secure portal to get a message, right? And over the years, I've had conversations with physicians who say exactly that. For certain populations, I would rather communicate with them via Facebook because that's where they are, that's where I can reach them, that's where I can make an impact, both on a broad communication basis and also on a one-to-one channel kind of basis.
Right. There's a question from the audience. It's not showing up on the question side, but it's asking about the insight on physician closed communities like Sermo
I don't know if you can hear
versus
me.
Open communities. And the
I
fact that
I can hear you, Mandy, but I lost Don and David.
Can you guys hear me?
Can you hear me?
Don, can you hear me?
Great.
I lost Mandy.
I can hear you, Shahid, yes. I think David, I don't know if David can hear me. But I think that the people online, let's see who can hear. So, okay, Ryan can hear, Donald can hear, Janet can hear. Okay, everybody can hear. We're having difficulty with the actual host. So I'll keep talking. I'll say that this is mine for now. Yeah. So there is a difference, right? So Sermo is the kind of premier online. I think it calls itself the number one doctor community, doctor social network. And I think that, yes, there's definitely a place for closed communities like that. I think that it is very true that doctors who might feel much safer in an anonymous environment, they don't fear retaliation from their affiliate. Like if they're part of an affiliated organization, they feel like they're able to much more anonymously share with their peers, and they feel like they're getting the feedback from their peers is validated. Like I believe that there is a validation process before you could even sign up for Sermo, right? So they want to make sure that they validate your credentials. They want to make sure that that you are who you say you are prior to you signing in and becoming part of this closed community. So there's definitely a huge value in that. And that is a social network. It's not the type of social engagement we're talking about where it's open. But I don't think that it's mutually exclusive. I think that there's a place for Sermo type involvement in social communities. And I think there's a place, a very appropriate place for open social communication with patients, with your community, and with other physicians as well. It's just that you have to be cautious. You have to be very conscious of HIPAA constraints. You have to be very conscious of not giving, clinical advice to a broad spectrum, or what might be perceived as clinical advice to a broad spectrum of patients. So, when you're publicly commenting, I think that you have to be very cognizant of what those constraints are. But I don't think that those constraints are any different than the way that a doctor would behave in the office. A doctor's not going to walk their patient out of the examination room, walk them into the waiting area, and have a discussion with that patient about their condition in the waiting area for everyone to hear, right? Like that's not behavior that's going to be conducive to continuing practice. And that's akin to what you would be doing on social media if you are giving a patient, if you're giving a patient unsolicited advice in a public forum, then you're effectively burning yourself out of practice. And David can probably comment on the legality of that. But I think that the rules and behaviors for social media engagement are going to be much more native and innate for physicians, for clinicians who have gone through the training already and are very concerned about privacy and already understand the delicate nature of the situations and the relationship that they have with their patients. I think that it would be much easier for most than they realize or than they think to engage appropriately. I think that it would come much more naturally than many of them who fear that type of engagement might believe. David, do you think that might be true, or am I oversimplifying?
That's right, and I think I think to your last point, Mandy, I've seen in a number of different texts the idea of sort of a reverse mentor. There is sometimes the approach taken to social media. Well, we'll find a 20-something to be our social media person, and they'll take care of that, and we won't worry about it. I would rather see a quote-unquote digital native be a reverse mentor to a clinical leader or to an executive in a healthcare organization and help that person communicate more effectively through social channels. And I think there's real value to that for the individual leader and for the organization and for their constituencies. To follow up on a point you were making before, Mandy, in terms of physician community, there's been a lot of discussion over the years about CIRMO and sort of the anonymous or pseudonymous communities like that. And the alternative to that is something like Doximity,
may have lost that.
Which is sort of a real name
David.
Verified.
So we'll let him jump back in with that if he gets a chance to dial back in and gets connected. One of the things we wanted to touch on a little bit here, Mandy, was what are some of the myths that are out there about social media? You can hear me? Oh, David's still on, and I'm talking over him. Okay.
Yeah, well, I can hear David too.
We're having some issues.
I can hear David too. It's funny. I think we're a really good example right now of some of the things that can go wrong in social media engagement, right? Like if the engagement is probably not the way to go. But if we're looking for organic engagement, and if you want to be able to show both your community, your patients, their caregivers, and your fellow physicians that you're a human being and that you have human characteristics and that you're going to occasionally say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing.
Right.
You might see nose hairs on the blab, right? Like those types of things are going to happen in social media engagements because they are typically they're fast and furious. So yes, they're unmediated, exactly, or at least they can be. But
unmediated.
But the myth, I think that talking about what some myths about social media engagement might be. The biggest one that I continue to hear is that HIPAA prevents clinicians from engaging on social media, right? A myth that I hear, and I know David will be able to speak to this very clearly, is that, HIPAA somehow prohibits engaging with patients, that it prohibits engaging with patients. Now, there are things that HIPAA does prohibit, but it does not prohibit you as a clinician from engaging with your patients via social media in a public forum. Should that be a choice that you and your patient mutually make, right? Like, David, you want to chime in on that?
Right. Absolutely. HIPAA is only the most recent in a long line of federal rules and laws that are blamed by the healthcare establishment for not doing something. Say, I can't do X, Y, and Z because that would be a violation of the fraud and abuse rules, or it's a kickback, or self-referral, or this, that, and the other thing. Or now it's HIPAA is the most frequently heard response. Well, I can't do X, Y, and Z, which would otherwise be a really good idea because of HIPAA. And as Mandi says, most of the time it's just not true. The main thing to remember about HIPAA is that it exists to protect patients' rights of privacy. And for the most part, if asked, a patient can say, yes, share my information, share my data, speak to me via open social media. That's what I really want to, that's where I want to have this conversation. And it's up to the patient. It is even up to the best interests of the patient if the patient is unconscious. I've seen yet another story in my feed in the past week or so about an unconscious patient whose family was not notified about his hospitalization, and therefore in an age of non-interoperable health records, a pre-existing condition was not known to the treating clinicians. Treatment may have gone differently had they known. Parents were not notified parents of an adult son. Parents could have said, oh, did you know that he has X, Y, and Z? That could have changed the treatment course. Patient died. So, in the name of HIPAA, a lot of horrible things are done. That's one extreme example, but there are many others between that extreme and what we would think is sort of more
right. And I think another
simple,
one of the key myths that I hear and that we combat on a regular basis is how hard this is, right? How hard social media can be and how time consuming. And I don't want to completely discount that, because it is hard to learn it can be hard to learn a new technology. It can certainly be hard to change a habit, right? And so it's really much more, like clinicians are typically very protective of their workflows. And I know Chuck had to leave and he's going to be so sad he missed this discussion about workflow, but so we're changing a workflow, we're changing a life flow. So, we're incorporating a new step into our daily processes, right? We are taking we're inserting a new place that we have to look online. We're inserting a new activity that we, have to perform, or that we feel like we have to perform. But, and the perception that activity is overwhelming, is something that I would consider to be a myth. But I come from a place of, digital native literacy, right? So in the tweet chat just before this blab, it occurred to me that the divide between the digital natives and those who have embraced social media in healthcare and those who have not is not very different. Or not totally different from the health literacy divide that we have in general with our patients, right? So we have some patients who are, they're doing all the research that they possibly can. They understand their condition. They have their records. They understand their records. They've got very specific questions. They prepare for their appointments. And then we have some patients who are on the complete other end of the spectrum who don't have any interest whatsoever in understanding how all of those dots are connected. And as clinicians looking at social media, I think that we have both ends of that spectrum as well. So I think that the myth or the perception that it is hard, and that it is not just hard, but overwhelmingly difficult to engage in social media, it is perpetuated by that great divide that we have in social literacy and in platform literacy and digital literacy amongst clinicians. And it's not necessarily a generational divide, but it does seem to skew much younger.
Yeah, and I think,
right. One of the issues standing in the way, and one of the barriers to engaging has got to be the costs and the opportunity costs involved, right? So as we move from a volume to value-based system of healthcare, there is greater value placed on things that can be demonstrably improved through the use of social media and other modes of communication. And to the extent that we can move clinicians out of the concern over the, how many patient encounters did I have today? What is my reimbursement going to look like? When we move away from that volume-based mindset, then we open up the possibilities to do a lot of interesting things. Social being
the physicians who are probably early adopters are already on, they're already doing what they're going to do. We're moving into a scenario where there are some physicians who are not exactly early adopters, but they're not too late either. They're starting to investigate and starting to see, okay, why might I do it? And then there's, of course, an entire group of people that are going to be having to be brought in kicking and screaming. So I think probably worth us talking to that crew, which is not the early adopters, they're not already on, and they're not necessarily, they don't need to be brought in kicking and screaming, but they do want to know why to do it. And so the business rationale and what to jump into, what not to jump into. So for example, if you were to say, what are the analogs? If you already use phone, fax, email, etc., to talk to other doctors, you already are doing, a little bit of social media, whether it's closed communities, open communities. We don't want to be paternalistic about it. We don't want to be polemic about it and say, okay, this is what social media means. If you're using email, it's okay. It's a 40-year-old technology. It still works and not a huge problem. Now, the question would be, if you look at the analog and say, do you go to parties where mostly there are other physicians? If so, you should hang out on Sermo. You should hang out on Doximity. You should hang out on those areas because they're closed communities. If you hang out at parties in which there's a big mix of patients and physicians, now you're ready to jump onto Twitter. Now you're ready to jump onto Facebook. If you're a guy that really believes that they know what they're doing and everybody should just listen to you, now you're a blogger. Now you're a guy who just wants to promote going out. So I love, David, your point about that reverse mentor. And if you look at that reverse mentor model and say, all right, here are the things that I want to do for my business and or for my personal brand, for me personally, there are actually a ton of ways where if you are the kind of physician who just says, look, I know a lot, I want to start sharing, you can do so using content curation, small amounts of tweets, small amounts of Facebook posts, etc. If you're the kind of guy who knows a lot and you want to share a lot, do long form blog posts to start off with. And you might only have to do once a quarter, once a month on a guest site somewhere just to get your word out, just to get your name out so that you can get involved in the community. But really start to think about and say, well, I enjoy parties with lots of physicians and no patients, or I enjoy parties with lots of patients and very few physicians, or I like groups of patients when they work together and they don't mind being public about it. So the good news is the number of tools and technologies available, even though there are the top 2 or 3 in each category, are wide and varied. And based on what you want to try to do, there's probably a half dozen places where you can do it with very little. I think the myth that Mandi mentioned about it taking too much time is overblown. That myth is definitely overblown because it could be as little time as you want or as much time as you want. And about the question around HIPAA, I agree with exactly what David and Mandi said, that it is also a myth that HIPAA doesn't let you do certain things. But one of the reasons why we are overly concerned about that is that it's you have to wonder to yourself, if you do something 100 times and it's correct, and then the 101st time you do something wrong, is that one time that you did it wrong going to cost you, is so detrimental that the benefits of that first 100 time is going to be completely wiped out, right? That's the fear, and it's a realistic fear. We don't want to overblow it as we're talking about other myths, but it's very, very real. You can accidentally do something that will get you into trouble. It could pull you into law. Not that it will create a lawsuit because of it, but it can be used in malpractice and other suits as part of discovery, as part of a pattern of behavior, et cetera. So while we said, HIPAA should never be used as a reason not to go onto social media, it of course is a reason not to share certain things on social media. And then you have to think to yourself, I mean, if you say, you know what, I really care about my brand, I really care about my influencer status, and I don't want to be interactive on Twitter, et cetera, and get into trouble, I'm just going to blog, or I'm just going to respond to posts that other people are responding to. That's perfectly okay, and we don't want to, make it sound like if you're not, as interactive as Mandi, of course, is. I mean, I don't think any one of us, it would take us years to get to the point where she is today. But that's not shouldn't necessarily be the goal. Do you guys agree with that, David, Mandi?
We aspire to that level of interactivity. I think to echo what Mandi said earlier, you think about, what are you going to say out there on social media? You don't want to say something if you would be uncomfortable seeing it above the fold on the front page of the Times. You don't want to say something in a crowded elevator You don't want to say something on a social media platform that's open to the world that is going to be a disservice to yourself or to others later. So that's, first guiding principle. Other guiding principle is sort of consent and buy-in of a patient if you're having a particular conversation. There's plenty of things that are not HIPAA related that can be done that don't implicate HIPAA at all, that can be done through the use of social media, that can promote health, that can promote a practice, that can promote population health, and that can be a service to the community, and that can serve the practice as a result. So it's not all about where's the line around sharing personal information. The question is, how do you use these tools? The question came up earlier about what's the return on the investment. And I typed in the sidebar before I joined by video. It's like asking, to Shahid's point, what's the return on investment of a telephone? I mean, did somebody ask, gee, let's do a spreadsheet. Let's do a make-buy analysis. Let's figure out, should I really get a telephone in my office? Should I really get a fax machine?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to we can go down that rabbit hole of fax machines. But, it's a tool. It's one arrow in the quiver. It's a thing that we use. It's part of being human in this day and age. And we call it social media. Right. In the future, it'll be called media.
It is, and it's funny because I know we only have a couple minutes left.
What we do.
Agreed. Mandy, I think you were trying to say something. On my screen, it says poor internet signal for you, and I don't see video, but other people
still have me? Okay, good. So I want to chime in on something that is important and that I'm seeing happen. Can you hear me? Yeah, they can hear me, Shahid.
Mandy, are you still there?
It's good.
They can hear me. Wait.
Let's give her a minute to come back now. A couple of the other. I can't hear.
There's something that's happening on the side that I want to make sure we address before we have to break. And that is, again, like kind of the final myth, right, is that by not being social, you can somehow prohibit bad reviews, right? So there's this fear that you're going to get bad reviews and that bad reviews are going to spread like wildfire and that this, that one incident, like you said, Shahid, you said that there might be 100 good incidents, and then the one time you do something wrong, that's what's picked up and amplified. And there's this fear, or there's this myth that by not engaging in social media, you can avoid that. And honestly, those things happen. So whenever, and you'll see it in your community Facebook pages, right? People talking about they want references for pediatricians, for dentists, for orthopedic specialists in their neighborhoods, in their areas, and the reputation exists. Your online reputation exists, whether you choose to participate or not. So, the myth that your lack of a presence is somehow going to influence whether or not that shows up is truly a myth. That was weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that too. I got a little fuzzy for a second.
Yep.
I think that's a really good point, and that was one of the things that I referenced in the post. The quote was, "It's like letting your grass grow. It's going to grow whether you want to do it or not. So, do you want it to look manicured and taken care of, or do you want to have it look like a giant mess?" And I think that's a really good analogy, right? So we are definitely getting right up to the time here. I wanted to, if we could do it quickly, I know that I'm going to throw out something we could potentially go on for a long time, but a quick imparting. Really important for somebody new who's coming in and wants to give this a shot, to have some goal for it and to have something to say whether or not they're getting that thing out of it. If you have a doctor or anybody in the healthcare community that is intrigued by this and says, I'd be interested in trying it out, what's something that they could do? Like, how would you advise them about setting a goal?
It starts there, right? You don't have to act like if you've never done social media at all, I would really recommend you set up an account on 2 platforms first. So Facebook and Twitter. Just create a profile and just search. Just look and see what's happening. See what's happening in your community. There are lots and lots of really easy resources, tutorials on Facebook and on Twitter for how to search and how to curate information. But just set up an account and start looking and see what information's available and see who the voices are that are talking about things that you care about. And it's okay if when you engage, you get distracted by the sports scores from last night or by, how cool your neighbor's yard is. What's the yard of the week that's going on? Like that's okay. That's human nature. And that same type of behavior is exactly how your patients, their caregivers, and their communities are going to react. So how you react and engage in social media and your kind of foray, just understand that is also how the humans that you interact with on a daily basis are engaging in these platforms. David?
Yeah, I would echo that and expand only to say that there are ways in which you can hone in on particular conversations that are going on. There's the healthcare hashtag project. So for Twitter newbies, there are hashtags that allow you to categorize the fire hose, and there's a website that you can surf to called the Healthcare Hashtag Project, and that collects hashtags about different topics in healthcare. Pick a bunch of those that are of interest to you, and you can follow those on Twitter. Then you can follow individuals who are active in those conversations. And you start to be able to find your people. You start to be able to find your communities in this way, because it's impossible. I mean, Twitter has a bajillion people on it. You're not going to talk to all of them.
That's great. And the one thing I'll say too is that people are really open on these platforms too. For the most part, if you reach out to someone and you're doing so in a genuine way, you'll get a response, and that kind of helps you get started too. When you have the courage to start doing that a little bit, and then people respond to you, it'll help get you going. So I'd encourage people to try that out. And we mentioned tweet chats a couple of times. Obviously, we did one earlier. That's also a good place to meet some folks and get used to talking in this type of environment. So
I have a quick story to end on for that. I did not realize that I had been friends with the president of Dell Health on Twitter for years before I ever went to work for Dell. So he and I knew each other, but I never knew that was his position. I knew who he was, and he and I engaged and interacted and had a lot of really fascinating discussion. But his position, his corporate position, wasn't ever something that was part of why I engaged with him. And so it was just kind of a complete surprise to me when I ended up interviewing with him.
Awesome. So in wrapping up here, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that both of you do some consulting work in this type of space, and you help people get started on this. So how would someone reach out to you? What's the best way to get in contact with you if someone was interested in learning more about that? Did I lose both of you now?
The easiest way to find me is on Twitter. So I'm at. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
So the easiest way to find me is to tweet me.
I can hear you, Mandy. I lost
Mandy
Dawn.
B Pro, and it's Mandy with an I. Yeah.
Got it.
And then.
Well, if you guys can't hear me, why don't one of you close the show?
Thank you so much for having me. I can hear you just fine, Dawn, and I can actually hear David, so I can hear everybody. But I'm going to close this out. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for all the people who have been watching and paying and chiming in with questions and comments on the side. I think that this has been really valuable. I'm going to look forward to going back through the live chat information and trying to answer some more of those questions and keep the conversation going online using the hashtag HCBiz. That's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mandy, for coming. Thank you, David. And thank you, She's Out. We do this every week. Wednesday starting at noon with the tweet chat, 12:30 for the blab. So thank you again. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.